Hey everyone, and welcome back to our DC Films podcast. This is episode 9, and this week the subject of the discussion for all of us is going to be kind of the importance of love and romance within the DCEU. And back with me are several of the people who have been with this podcast from the beginning, as well as someone new to the group. If you guys want to go ahead and reintroduce yourselves, as well as for the new person here, want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Artyom, and I'm Greg and Law from Tumblr.
Hey guys, it's Lily from Lily Loves Comic.
Hi guys, I'm Jean. I'm Batch Activity on Tumblr.
Hi, I'm Katie, and I'm Story Advocate on Tumblr.
I'm Danielle, and I'm a Social Justice League on Tumblr.
All right, and thank you, Danielle, for joining us. I've been trying to get you on this for a little while now, so I'm glad that you finally be here.
It's awesome to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, it's no problem, and especially, because you and I are both, like Lois fans, that's the name of the, Lois and Clark's, ship name. And to kind of get started on that, even back in, the Smallville days, Clark and Lois's relationship has been one of, my favorite aspects of being a Superman fan, because their relationship is one of the most important relationships and most important aspects of, I think, of the DC universe in any medium, whether it is the comics or various television series or currently in the DCEU. So, Danielle, if I can start with you, what are your overall thoughts on, Lois and Clark's relationship that's kind of started from the comics and translating into the DCEU?
I think that it's weird because it feels like it's over discussed and it feels like it's under discussed. It feels like something that we don't necessarily address in its fullness in fandom, and in some ways it's kind of omnipresent in the series. But I think that it's really important in the way that it's a relationship. It's a relationship of real intellectual equals, and I think one of the reasons I'm drawn to it so much is because it is sort of like an example of what I've been calling intellectual intercourse, where two people are actually the sexiness that's bouncing back and forth between this couple is actually just the fact that they find each other really intellectually intriguing. And there's a lot of physical tension there too, but I think that what's really great is that we have an emphasis on sort of this cerebral connection between these two characters, in a genre that a lot of times really emphasizes the physical, really emphasizes that objectification of women, and we have really just two people who really dig each other on a mental level.
Yeah, and that's a great point to bring up too, especially looking at, for me, my two favorite interpretations of Lois and Clark's relationship have been in the DCEU as well as Smallville, and in both of those, there's a mutual respect with each other, even before they're even together. Just seeing the relationship, and they've always seen each other more as equals than just the person I'm trying to pine for. In Man of Steel, especially, we look at their relationship and how it starts, and one of the great things, and we've briefly touched on this in the past, in the fact that in Man of Steel, Zach didn't treat Lois like she was dumb. She figured out his secret right away. And the whole Lois not knowing who Superman is just because he's wearing glasses trope, it got old. And I'm glad that Zach was the one who kind of was you know what, it's really not that big of a deal story-wise, so let's just not worry about it. And Lois was the one who was smart enough to figure it out, and when it came down to it, she was going to protect the secret no matter what, even if the world was on the line.
Well, and I think the coolest thing about the DCU is that by doing that, Snyder has sort of changed Lois's role from an objective to more of a partner, which is basically what happens whenever you collapse the triangle for two. If you take away that mystery, you take away the tension there, all you have left to deal with is the actual relationship, and you have to be invested enough in the relationship. And that's one of the reasons I'm so grateful that Snyder is so committed to that, is that he can really focus on the relationship and doesn't really need to lean on this will they, won't they, is Clark good enough for Lois, is Lois good enough for Clark BS that we've been dealing with for decades.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. To me, it feels a lot more genuine than any of the will they, won't they that's been happening. Like, not that I don't love seeing that trope happen over and over.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it does feel a lot more real. Like once that secret's gone between them, you know, like they can be honest with each other, and definitely like having like the reason why Clark falls in love with her is a lot more evident than just being like a crush on her from work, which you know she is on her own extremely like interesting and amazing, and that's why Clark would like her even if she didn't know his secret. But the fact that like in this story, like she's really the first person outside his family to really trust him and accept him, and the fact that he can really share his whole life with her is the reason why like they work so well as a couple, right?
And I completely agree. So for me, again, just kind of going back to kind of like how they established her in this current universe, like how they've handled Lois, I think is probably one of the best ways I've ever seen Lois interpreted. Because again, as much as I love Smallville, and I've just said like that was one of the reasons why I love the relationship so much. Because it's television, they have to create that like tension all the time of like the will they, won't they, drag that out for a season and a half, and then they finally get together and they're still figuring out all that stuff. And
the show ends. Pull the trigger.
Yeah, and then like they finally get together and like they do have that relationship, and yeah, that does kind of change the Superman mythos because it is before he becomes Superman, but like seeing that and then seeing Man of Steel where it's like the secret ultimately wasn't that big of a deal and allows them to have an open and honest relationship without that unnecessary tension between the two of them. I think that's, again, one of the many things that Zach handled so well in giving us this new interpretation of Lois Lane, who, despite what many fanboys say, you know, I think she very much so is like the Lois Lane from the comics. Like, she was out there investigating this story with like on her own. She was the one who went to Canada to investigate this this thing in the ice, and that's ultimately what led to her discovering Clark. And she does so many things that are Lois Lane character-esque. And it's why sometimes it's frustrating when we hear people criticizing Lois, and I think that also comes in a place of misogyny because they just want like Lois to be like a guy who like they want like Lois to be like any other female superhero and just like kick the bad guys in the face and all that kind of stuff. When like she doesn't have to do that. She's a badass in other aspects.
Yep.
And I felt like she was
kick people in the face. Sorry, go ahead, Jean.
Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, I felt like they did a really accurate portrayal of like someone, an older woman in her field, especially like in the kind of role that Lois would grow into be. Because, you know, usually when we see Lois, she's always younger, like, you know, she's in her 20s and she's just maybe a junior reporter later on in her career when she's already really been established, and we can see the kind of strength that comes from her and the kind of intelligence and, you know, just experience in general that, like, you know, it gives credit to Zach for, you know, actually incorporating an older woman and not like de-aging her in some way. Like, even if they cast older women, sometimes they just treat them like they're in their 20s anyway. Like, that's the implication. But yeah, we get a clear sense that Lois has been in the industry for a while. You know, she knows what she's doing. Yeah,
I agree there. She's not spending any time playing around.
The power balance in that relationship is so delicate. You know, I think that her being a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter and her being really foremost in her field and having all of that confidence and being older than him is a huge part of balancing out the fact that she's dating the most powerful dude on earth. And kind of that idea that, like, you know, there's going to be a weird power differential. And I like the idea of him personally sort of getting to relinquish that, getting to be like, well, Lois is the bomb, and, you know, I'm here to follow.
Yeah, like, do you think it gives her the amount of, like, I don't know, just some kind of assurance to be able to handle this magnitude of, like, the kind of problems that Zack wants to bring up in the universe about, like, it equips her to handle them, I guess.
Yep. Well, and I loved how it put her, and when you talk about the power balance, the fact that she was the one who tracked him down and found out his secret, like, I love that. Because, you know, not only is she smart, she's insanely intelligent, but it puts her on an even level with him. He can't just dash around and be all mysterious and interesting and stuff like that. She's like, no, I figured you out. Oh, hey, whoa, that pulls a whole new level into the relationship, and I loved where they went from that, because then it became one of trust and or do you do this or do you don't, and all of the issues that come with that, instead of who is the mysterious man. And I really, really appreciated that. I didn't even realize that they had dispensed with that entire superhero and the chick doesn't know who he is trope until we left the movie, and it was like, wow, I didn't miss it at all. So I felt like, I don't know, I liked how they handled it, and it gave it much more weight as a relationship for me.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. Again, that's why I can watch Man of Steel infinite number of times, and still find something about it that I appreciate more and more. And then again, we talk about this many times, and that just comes from Zack's filmmaking and his storytelling, and the way was able to seamlessly give us this new interpretation of Superman while respecting the original versions and all of that. He's able to give us real people in this story, you didn't feel like they were caricatures, or we were in this fantastical world where these people are over the top, and it's a romance that you can't buy into. Unlike there are other movies that they force a romance and it just doesn't work, and they're just doing it for the sake of doing it. In the DCEU, especially with Lois and Clark's relationship, I felt like their relationship has been organic, and it feels like a real relationship between two people.
Yes.
Not even a superhero and a non-powered person. They just feel like it feels like a genuine relationship, and genuine, you can feel the chemistry between Henry and Amy, and I love their dynamic in the movies. And and kind of going back to what Gene brought up earlier, the fact that bringing in Amy Adams, who's older than Henry, and she's in her early 40s, and Henry is in his mid 30s. I feel like in most instances, Hollywood, if it was anyone other than that Zack, I honestly feel like they would have cast someone younger and have her been a little more sexualized, a little it wouldn't have been what we've gotten with Amy's performance. And I'll admit, when I first found out Amy Adams is Lois Lane, I was a little worried, because at the time I'm okay, well, am I going to see Amy Adams or am I going to see Lois Lane? And again, since I've seen the movie so many times, I just see Lois Lane, and Amy Adams, I think, embodies everything that Lois Lane is supposed to be and is.
Well, and Amy said a couple times that, Snyder really wanted to bring out, the essential qualities of her in that role, and I think that it really shows that he went for a very organic approach, whereas a lot of Lois's they pull a sort of dialogue clip, a sort of essence, they pull a sort of 1940s sort of feel for Lois.
Yeah.
And in 2013, that would have just felt it would have felt strange. It would have felt out of place. And I think that, as much as Erica Durance made it work on Smallville and actually organically incorporated it into the universe, it's a very hard thing to do, and I think it would have been a really hard thing to buy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I will say, Amy Adams, I agree with you, Nick. You watch it, I watch it now, and I'm just the things that she pulls in certain things are not things that Amy typically does in other roles. You can tell that she's really made Lois her own. And even when they're sitting at the table and he says, oh, it's not an S on my planet, it means hope. And she goes, well, here it's an S. And she kind of raises her eyebrows what are you going to do? And it's so very Lois to me. Everything about her is just the whole racing out of her apartment to escape the feds, and then running down the alley, and she turns around with that look yeah, I'd totally be you. Ah, crap, I'm busted. But, that is Lois. That is Lois to a T. And it's really cool to see, she said when she auditioned for the role, she expected to color her hair. Lois has always been a brunette. And she expected that if, by any long shot chance, she got the role, she'd be willing to dye her hair brown to do it. And Zack was like, no, let's keep her red. I think it's fine. And she was like, oh, okay. And so, in a lot of ways, I agree. He's taking Amy, who's not the immediate person we think of as Lois Lane incarnate, and going, look, this woman is Lois Lane. And so he's taking an iconic character that we all know and love, and then putting another woman on top of her and gelling them together, and you could see how, look, Lois Lane can be any one of us. We can all have Lois Lane qualities. We can all be Lois Lane if we choose to. We can all do what we want, but it's really, really cool to see her take that role and make it her own and own it so well. And so I agree. It's really, really exciting to see Zach go, no, that's cool. Let's go with this. And it's I don't know how to describe it, except that it kind of breaks some boundaries, and I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah. There's this beautiful part about DCEU Chloe is that they often share this gaze between each other, like they look into each other's eyes and they literally don't need to say anything. They get each other in silence. And also my favorite part is that Lois Lane is always in the middle of action and she's always there to support Superman, to help him, like on Zod's ship. She's the one who saves Superman and escapes her imprisonment, and even in Batman v Superman, when the fight with Doomsday is going, she's also there, and she also helps Superman to get the spear and eventually defeat Doomsday. And also DCEU Close, they bring some interesting questions, like in Batman v Superman, in the bathtub, Lois Lane says, I don't know if it's possible for you to love me and still being you. Like, is there a room for romance for Superman? Like, can he allow this to himself? And pretty much the entire movie was about how human connections are important to us, and it is what makes us heroes. And pretty much the final monologue by Batman, he sums up everything that we're humans, we have to stand together in order to do good. And this is pretty much what Superman and Lois' relationship is all about.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. Totally agree. Especially because, right after she asked that question, he gives her the rose. He doesn't even say anything. And again, I think in the commentary, I constantly talk about this, but they do talk without words all the time, and I love it. But he just gives her the rose, and it really is a basis of, I can't not love you. So, you know what I mean? It's impossible. That's part of who he is. So they're going to have to figure out how to deal with that and the fact that he's Superman, because he's not just going to give it up because it's difficult. It's ingrained in him. And
I
it's just
parallel that moment.
Really cool.
Yeah, I was parallel that moment when she says, can you love me and still be you? With that moment with Senator Finch on TV when she's asked, must there be a Superman? And I always just think in that moment, I always think there is, and he does. Like, this is the situation that we're in. This is what we're dealing with. It's not a question of whether we should or not. It's where we are.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And you're right. And that is entirely the emphasis that we're here, and this is what it is. So we have to figure out how to handle it. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. All right. Who opened their window?
Yeah. Yeah, so to kind of move on from Man of Steel, and when we open in Batman versus Superman, one of the first scenes we see, like after we kind of see, Bruce's perspective of the events at the end of Man of Steel, one of the first people we see is Lois, and she's out, in Africa investigating the story of this warlord, trying to get the perspective of what's going on in that country's civil war and everything that's going on there. Like, again, showing that Lois, sorry, I'm like about to say Amy, they're so interchangeable. In that she's willing to put herself on the line for the story, and she's not. And one of the best lines in that exchange was like, when the warlord was like, I didn't know the interview was with the lady, and when she backtracked, she like stops him, and she's like, I'm not a lady, I'm a journalist.
Yep. Again, that is so Lois Lane to me.
And that is, yeah, and that's why when. I want to always have to bring up these criticisms, but when people bring up the criticism of Lois Lane is just a damsel in distress and she's always needing to be saved and blah blah blah, there are interpretations where Lois has intentionally put herself out there in danger, but she knows full well what she's doing. She's not doing it because like she wants to be safe. Most of the time, it's because she believes in the story she's trying to tell, and
Yes.
and so if she's willing to put herself out in danger, that's part of what her job is.
Yeah.
And especially in looking at the beginning of Batman vs Superman, when she's trying to confront that warlord and everything that's going on with like Lex Luthor, like with what he was starting to set up at the beginning of that movie, like she knew full well what the dangers could be, and she wasn't like expecting Clark to save her necessarily, but from like to know that like she knows that like if anything were to happen, Clark would most likely be there. Like for her, I understand like, oh well, if anything does bad happen, Clark is gonna be there, but at the same time, like if something happens, she's doing it because that's her job, and that she's choosing to put herself on the line like that.
Yep, and that's exactly what she was doing in Man of Steel when she followed Clark in the first place into the ice to find the ship. It wasn't a matter of, I'll go in there and somebody will save me. It's a matter of, I want to know what's going on, and I'm willing to take the risk to go find out. I don't know. I myself have groused and fussed and hated on that damsel in distress trope in my younger years. I admit it. And in some ways, sometimes it drives me crazy because often in the writing, they make her just stupid to get her in distress. And that's just embarrassing. Mm-hmm. But Lois Lane never seems that way to me. It's wild because, like, she is just perfectly willing to run into it in order to find the truth. And that is always something that she is all right with. And so the fact that her job is that, the fact that she's like a military brat, all of her characteristics add up to be a person who's like, you know what, this could be trouble, but I'm going to run into it anyway. I'm going to go find out what's going on. And that speaks to me, that's okay. Like, I don't look at her and go, oh, well, she's just an idiot damsel. She's not. She weighs the chances, but then she goes and does it anyway. I mean, they wanted to take her on the alien ship. If the whole military's like, no. And she's like, no, I'll do it, Mm-hmm. But that was what ended up saving him. So it's just wild to me. I don't know. It's easy to go, oh, well, damsel in distress. But at the same time, the times when she truly ended up in distress, like when Lex threw her off the building and when her little capsule got sabotaged leaving the Black Zero, stuff like that, those are not things that are her doing and that she was blindly and stupidly running into. Those are natural consequences of where she was at the moment or who she is in a relationship with. Like that is not something that he can go, oh, well, she's just a damsel in distress because Lex kidnapped her, took her to the top of his building, and threw her off. I mean, yeah, she's in distress and all, but that doesn't mean that she was stupidly running into danger and going, oh, well, Superman will save me. I don't know. It mm-hmm. just doesn't feel the same. And so I don't appreciate hearing people grouse about her being a damsel in distress because she's just really not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of giving her agency is understanding that, like, when she's doing those things, it's always something that matters. In the desert with General Amajad, that's a really important interview. And the first question that she asks lets us know that she's there to advocate for these people. And she's doing something that's, that's going to have an impact, and she believes that she does. She asks him straight up if he's a terrorist. She's saying, please define yourself on your own terms. I'm giving you the chance to have in print who and what you think you are. And I mean, I think that is across the board with her investigations. The first thing that they do in her introduction in Man of Steel is make it clear that she's there because she's a war reporter, because someone was really impressed by her war correspondence. And that's really, really important because it shows that she's out there in the middle of danger for a purpose. She's not just like a danger chaser. She's really just, this is the world we live in. It's dangerous, but this is my job.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Totally agree.
And that's where, like, I don't want to bash any other interpretations because each one, I think, has brought something new to the character that I've appreciated. But kind of looking back at the original, the Reeve era films and Superman 2 specifically, in that scene where they're in the Niagara Falls, right? And, like, Lois willingly, throws herself into the water because she's trying to prove that Clark is Superman. Like, that is something that, and everyone obviously loves the Reeve era Superman films, but that's something that, like, obviously, like, I think, even if Lois didn't know Clark's secret in this universe, I don't think she would willingly put herself in danger like that. Because, like, why?
I hope not. But I will say, like, when I look back at that scene now as a kid, I was like, what are you, stupid? Just turn into Superman and save her. Because I was really young and didn't get the fact that, like, that was the entire point. But she must have had amazing, like, certainty about her conclusion,
Mm-hmm.
So, because I'm like, I don't know. I don't think I'm afraid of heights. And then I get up somewhere high and it's like, holy crap, I could die. I think I'm going to get down now. And so I just don't guarantee I would have that much oomph or courage in my convictions to really just, go over into Niagara Falls. So I do agree with you there. And I don't really see this Lois doing that. I don't know, she's just portrayed a little bit differently, but
well, we have the dawn circumstances if we have basically what we've kind of cornered Clark into as being kind of a dick. I mean,
yeah,
we're going to be totally forthright about the Donner films, like, and I, I'm essentially flawed in this conversation because I'm not a big fan of Donner's Superman, but I mean, in the inside of that lie, you sort of have a weird manipulation of information. You have a sort of weird manipulation of motive. And I don't know, every time that Lois has ever thrown herself off the top of a building or off the top of a waterfall, in order to get Clark's attention, I've always felt like it was warranted. I've always felt like, oh, well, he's being an idiot. It's time to get his attention in the most dramatic way possible.
I do feel like she was forcing his hand. She was calling his bluff in the most dramatic way possible.
Mm-hmm.
But,
But that's also kind of who Lois Lane is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if I had a caved in 2 seconds flat and saved her and been like, all right, fine, you're right, jeez, but he just, like, chased me down there. I'm like, dude, just do it, so. But, yeah, I can see your point.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to like dumb down like that version of Lois Lane. I think that like Margot Kidder's Lois Lane was great. I mean, for that time, and but by her doing that, I mean, like, she knew ultimately she was right about Clark being Superman. It just he just didn't at the time he just didn't trust her enough to know his secret. And by the time she finds out, it was an accident and it was unintentional. Well, he didn't intend for her to find out, and I don't think if she didn't ultimately find out, I don't think he would have told her, at least not for a long time.
Yeah.
Whereas,
those are the kinds of things that always make me uncomfortable. Sorry to cut you off. It's just that whole triangle when it gets to be like that, then it's like, it just makes me cringe. So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, when you start doing your research too, you find out that Jerry and Joe wanted Lois to know really, really early. They didn't expect the triangle to persist the way that it did. And didn't expect it to be dragged out that way. Like, that was the beginning of their story. And then the rest of their story, essentially, I think my understanding, as far as what I've read, historically speaking, is that they expected Lois to basically be like a sidekick, to be like a partner.
That would be so awesome.
And I think that, editorially they got limited, and I think that, for the time in which they were writing, it was really constrained. And I wonder if Snyder's vision isn't way more pure to the intention of the series.
I was going to say, they kind of wanted her to be, like Man of Steel and Batman being Superman. What? But I do agree, and maybe, I don't know, I have to also give, I think it was David Goyer credit. His was the quote I read ages ago where he talked about that, and he said even in writing the script, it wasn't just Snyder, although I'm sure he was right on board with it. But that he was like, but it just seemed so stupid. She just seemed so stupid. No matter how he did it, if she didn't know, then she was just so dumb. And this was a really smart character. So finally, we decided we're just gonna get rid of that and just have her find him. And I was like, that was the most inspired thing you could have done, because they threw out any possibility of that getting retroacted or messed with or changed down along the line, which was great. So,
go ahead.
I like that in Smallville this triangle was portrayed in the best way possible, because Clark was always using super speed and he never showed his face to the public, and that's why Lois never figured out that the Blur, as he was called in Smallville, and Clark are the same person because he had a much better disguise there. But I'm glad that DCEU pretty much ditched the whole idea and went straight to the point where Lois discovers his secret right away, and they build their relationship on trust from the very beginning.
That has more, I don't know, heft for me emotionally than any other way they could have done it. That is the one that makes me go, oh, these guys, they're the ones that break me up and make me cry because of the way they've done it. It wouldn't be nearly as amazing. It wouldn't have nearly the effect on me emotionally if they hadn't done it that way. But it is such a beautiful thing. So, yeah.
And it really is, too, yeah. And for me,
Good.
it's... And going into, Batman v Superman, a lot of us were excited just for the Batman and Superman aspects of it, but at the end of the day, I think it's Lois and Clark's story that is the heart of Batman v Superman, Like, in the end, when, Clark, he's about to sacrifice himself, he says, this is my world and you are my world. After earlier saying that, his world doesn't exist anymore, and... To me, it shows how much Lois really does mean to him, and then we also kind of see a bit in that nightmare sequence of how something happened to Lois to make Clark turn, and he doesn't necessarily look like he's under a mind control or something. He looks like he's still kind of aware of his actions, but something bad happened to Lois in that scenario that made him that way. So, in many interpretations of Superman, Lois is Clark's anchor in that way, and that's why when you look at the Injustice video games, even though I don't like that interpretation of Superman, again, it's Lois's death, Superman being responsible for Lois's and his unborn child's death in those scenarios that makes him turn. For me, again, showing how important Lois is to Clark's story. That's what I take from that. Not that, oh, hey, this is a cool version of Superman. I'm not for dictator, evil, murderous Superman. I'm not about that.
That was awful.
I enjoy those stories as an Elseworld kind of thing, but and I brought this up on Tumblr a little over a week ago, saying that I find it frustrating when people say that the Injustice video games are what Batman v Superman or the DCEU should have been in terms of the fighting aspect of it in the story, but it's but then they go on to criticize Snyder for not giving us the real Superman, but then they praise a Superman who is about as far away from what Superman is supposed to be as possible, and that is just really frustrating to me. And again, I enjoy the Injustice video games and stories, they're very interesting stories, but those aren't, first of all, they're not canon, they're not, they have cool interpretations of these characters, but that is not Superman. That is not who Superman is.
This is how you know these kind of criticisms are BS, though, is because you have thousands and thousands of people saying these movies are too dark, these movies are too sinister, it's the murderverse, and then they pick literally the darkest interpretation I've ever seen of any DCU ever. That's it's not your actual complaint. Be honest. Be honest about what your problem is.
I have read. Sorry.
Go ahead, Jean.
No, just
sorry. Go ahead.
No.
Oh.
Somebody's talking.
No, but it's just. It is frustrating when people point out certain when they're saying that something is too dark and they're still fans of something that is also really dark. Looking at the DCEU and people and also one of my favorite DC animated movies, which was the Flashpoint Paradox movie. People praise that, but people don't like dark stories within live action for some reason.
That's weird.
Animation, it's okay because that's the nature of the story. But then when it's and first of all, the DCEU is not nearly as dark as people say it is. And also, people just say that because it's not a bright color palette and it doesn't look like the Marvel movies. It has a different look to it.
Making a joke every other line.
Yeah, and not even that, just visually, it's distinctive from the Marvel movies. And even if you look at Wonder Woman is a little different. Wonder Woman is a little more brighter, but even then, Wonder Woman, while it's set in World War I, it still has like that like kind of dark, heavy feel to it, like visually and just like almost like physically it kind of does. And it's frustrating when people like criticize one thing for being dark in the DCEU when they're fans of other dark DC stories, but it's like you can't have. So one thing being dark is a problem, but the other thing isn't. That criticism has always bothered me.
I mean, not to equivocate, but the MCU is really, 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 really dark in places. Like, narratively speaking, there's some really, really effed up shit that happens. Like, like the darkness. Like, if you want to measure darkness, like the Avengers movie ends in a horrible, scary place in which we have an entire ruling body of the government being like, yeah, okay, let's nuke the populace. And nobody wants to talk about that particular darkness. Everybody wants to talk about the freaking tone of the DCEU, which has nothing to do with what's actually happening on screen.
In the end, it comes down to likability is not the word I'm trying to come up with, but as always, the way it is framed is that the government's bad and they're okay with nuking, but don't worry, our heroes will come in and save because they know better than all and they know better than everyone and they are the hero. And that's how we're used to seeing it portrayed. And so it's easy to accept and it's easy to digest. And then when you get, big, very strong, still figuring out all of his powers, going head to head with somebody just like him, and there's casualties in the way, but still most of the damage was done by Zod. Somehow we can't seem to figure that out because but he doesn't know all and save all, and he's not completely perfect in every aspect, and what is this? We are confused and we do not know how to accept this, and I think in a lot of ways it's just that we've been trained too long with a certain narrative, and now that we're expected to accept something a little bit more real, somehow we can't do it. But that worries me very much because we shouldn't be worshiping these characters as deities. We should be seeing them as real people, or at least that's me. I would rather see them as real person.
Yeah, and I completely agree.
And to bring it back to the theme of the podcast. The lightness. I mean, like the thing about calling the DCEU dark is that the literal theme that we've established, basically officially as of Wonder Woman, is that love saves the day.
Yes.
And if that's a dark theme, then I'm really, really deeply confused.
Because especially if you look at, like, again, from film to film to film, even though, like, I have problems with Suicide Squad and people don't necessarily love all these films, but each film, like, love is at the center of the story. You look at Suicide Squad, when you look at, like, Deadshot's story and even to an extent Harley's story, that's based in love. Wonder Woman ends with, like you just said, Wonder Woman ends with her being like, I believe in love, and like love was ultimately what you said. That love is what saves the day. And in Batman v Superman, Superman's willing to sacrifice himself because he loves this world and he loves Lois.
Yep.
And in Man of Steel, he feels accepted in the world because of his love for Lois and his love for humanity. Yep. So,
and even in Batman v Superman, when he's really struggling with himself, he's really having a hard time, he goes to the top of the mountain. Talking to his dad really helped, but hearing about how his mom, helped his dad get past those tough times helped him even more. You don't get through this by yourself. You can't be a lone wolf and handle all this darkness and not cave. Batman is the prime example of that in this film. He's got Alfred's love, but it's not the same. And it is only the redeeming love of those people in his life, one of which is Lois Lane, thank you, and the other was Martha, that really keeps him centered and grounded enough to be able to come back and do this. Otherwise he probably would have left.
Which is so beautiful.
You're right. It's always
it's so beautiful and it's so subversive to this idea, and I think that I always think of Buffy the Vampire Slayer immediately, not to invoke Whedon or anything. I don't want to bring him into the room.
We have several times. So
there it is.
Oh,
hold on. I'm
did
stepping
give them
outside.
That's fine.
Are you having fire alarm problems too? Mine
I
went off in
am.
the middle of the night, and I did not appreciate it.
so rude. They give me like 2 hours notice. All right. Anyway, but what I was gonna say is it's so subversive of this sort of like hyper masculine, running off on your own, lone wolf, saving the day kind of idea. When in fact, like, the best thing that we can learn from these films is that human connection is everything, and groups of people save the day. It's not one dude with a machine gun.
Yep. And it's not the chosen one who is always amazingly perfect and can overcome anything. You know,
Even Superman needs someone's help in order to save the day.
He does, and that is one of the things I've loved the most about this interpretation, is that they really have focused on the fact that he feels like an alien. He feels like an outsider. He doesn't feel like one of them. And the fact that Lois knows everything about him, who he is, and accepts him for that and loves him, that really goes a long ways. And his mom is the same way. You know, it is the love of these people around him that helps him feel like he belongs there. But hey, this is such a dark universe, so.
And we're gonna follow that through with Justice League. Like, we've already got posters that say you can't save the world alone.
Yeah,
like,
and I think
I'm so excited.
To kind of piggyback off of what Danielle was saying, I think a lot of fans, I think in general, one of the big problems when it comes to people and their dislike or hate for the DCEU comes from expectations in general. And if you look at the hate towards the DCEU, if you could take away like the refilms and Smallville and the animated series, and if the films were judged on their own merit and not based on any prior knowledge of these characters, or just did on their own, I think more people would have enjoyed them. But because people can't seem to, I can't speak for everyone who doesn't like the movie, but I think for a lot of people, because they can't seem to get out of, like, Christopher Reeve out of their mind when they think of Superman. Or in Ben Affleck's case, I think some people aren't over the fact that Christian Bale is gone. So they're like, why is Ben Affleck Batman when Christian Bale could have been Batman still? Like, and in terms of like tone, people look at, like, again, Marvel films or even like the Reeve era films and like, oh, like, why can't these films be like that? And that comes from a set of expectations that you of course you're gonna be let down because the film isn't what you're trying to force it to be. And that's always gonna be a problem, no matter what it is, no matter what form of art it is. If you go into something with a level of expectation that you're trying to force upon it, you're gonna be, in most instances, I feel like you're gonna be let down, because again, like, you're not allowing yourself to be open to interpretation, to be open to, like, letting the artist show you what they have to offer in that aspect. You can't like you can't force art. You can't, like, force, you know. Like, again, art is a subjective thing, whether it's film or television or, you know, whatever. There are so many different interpretations to stories and just media and art in general, that if you force yourself to, you know, to be that person and to be, you know, like, oh, like, this story has to be my way or I'm not gonna like it, then you're gonna walk out disappointed.
You always will. Yep.
Yeah.
They will bite you in the butt every time. You have to be really careful. I've been bit by expectations. It happens, but you really need to stop and think, okay, am I constantly screwing myself over with my expectations? Do I need to relax a little bit? Maybe I'll enjoy some stuff a little bit more. And, you know, because if you're just like, wow, everything sucks and I hate it all, maybe it's because you keep going into it with expectations that you're never going to get.
Yeah, I also don't get that mentality, like, people who want to see another Christopher Reeve Superman, like, you already got him, why can you allow something new to happen?
Yeah, and I mean, they already rejected it with Brandon Routh, right?
Yep. That's right. And we brought this up previously.
Like, the reason why they wanted to go in such a drastically different direction, the reason why Christopher Nolan, like, approached Zack Snyder about it, to take it in such a different direction, especially keeping in mind that the last movie Zack had done was Watchmen, right? Yeah, and like, they approached Zack to take Superman in like a completely different tone, especially like related to the Dark Knight, because like they were in production at the same time, right? like the last movie, The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, I
and
believe they were
Man
filming
of
around the
Steel,
same time.
They were in production at the same time. So, and Christopher Nolan was the one who recruited Zack. So, like wanting to take it in such a different direction was caused pretty much by the rejection of Brandon Routh's Superman Returns. Like the reason why they wanted to reboot the Dark Knight, like the reason why the Batman movie stopped after Batman and Robin is because everyone just made fun of like, you know, fat nipples.
Yeah.
That was
Bad nipples, baby. I remember
Oh, God.
even back then I was like, "Why did you put those on there? That doesn't help anything."
Yeah, and
Yeah, like Zack even made fun of bad nipples in Watchmen, right?
like again, if people want to keep wanting to go back to the Reeve era Supermans, and we've brought this up several times in the last few podcasts, in that they gave fans a Reeve era Superman film in Superman Returns. People didn't like it, so they rebooted it. So when people keep saying, why can't we just go back to, why can't it have Superman be like it was the Christopher Reeve era? Well, they tried. You didn't like it. So stop complaining about something you're not going to get, because when you got it, you didn't want it. So,
and this is my new theory, is just that, like, at a certain point, you have to sort of put it down and say, hey, wait, do I like Superman? You know, like really, if I'm going to complain about the dark version, if I'm going to complain about the light version, if I'm going to complain about everything in between, if you haven't liked any live-action Superman since one particular perspective that was the first perspective, and there's never going to be another first perspective, do you really like Superman? And if the answer is no, like, cool, awesome, but then, like, leave us alone.
yeah.
Well put.
Yeah, and again, it's just, it all comes back down to the expectations, what people are forcing themselves to want when it comes to these movies. And it's just like, that's why when people are like looking at like Henry Cavill and Amy Adams, Clark and Lois, they're looking at them and they're like, oh, why can't they be Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder? Well, first of all, because they're not.
Yeah.
And secondly, it's like you can't keep telling the exact same story again and again and again, because then it's going to get stale, and then it's not going to be interesting, and no one's going to want to see it if it's the same thing over and over again.
They're not going to like that either.
Yeah, and like they tried to, and looking at Superman Returns, they did try to change things up a bit with like the story point of like Superman being gone for 5 years, and he comes back to Lois being in a relationship with another man, and she has a son who you ultimately find out is Superman's, and that creates a whole set of problems that like Lois didn't even know that her son was Superman's. Like that was, yeah, that story point was a little bothersome looking back on it. But like, at least that movie, like, it kind of tried to honor the Christopher Reeve era, of course, but also kind of change up the story a little bit by saying, like, even though Clark and Lois have this history together, that she doesn't like she doesn't have to be with him, you know? Like, in that movie, they start her out with someone else, and by the end of the movie, she's still with that person. She's not like, oh, I'm just gonna drop everything I'm doing because Superman's back. Like, in that movie, like, there was some reservations between her and, like, having Superman back in her life, and she's not ready to just, like, jump back into where things were because she's in a relationship with someone else. She's engaged to someone else.
Yeah.
And he can't just come back and expect everything to be normal. And in that aspect of the story, I liked it because, again, it wasn't trying to be the same thing that we had gotten previously.
It definitely plays toward my bias, because it just feels like we're shooting into the future and letting Margot Kidder's Lois Lane realize that Reeves' Superman is kind of a dick. And just being like, maybe I just want a husband who's going to be, like, honest with me.
And not leave, you know.
And not give her a super roofie.
You know what that Lois Lane needs?
Yeah.
That Lois Lane needs a Henry Cavill Superman.
It does not reflect this time.
Like that,
She
like,
needs
honestly,
a
like,
husband who will be honest with her.
yeah.
Share his life.
And again, that's why like we keep circling back to this, because this is the whole point of the podcast.
I know. Come back.
In this interpretation in the DCEU, by not having any lies or secrets, they can have an open and honest and mainly a real relationship that between two people. Not even between Superman and a non-powered person, but between two, for lack of a better phrase, two human beings, you know, who are going to be flawed, who like, not every day in their relationship is going to be perfect. There's going to be ups and downs. There are going to be trials in their relationship, but at the end of the day, from what we've seen, they're both willing to put in that effort and be there for each other no matter what.
Yep,
exactly.
And that's an important aspect to have.
I talk about DCEU, Lois and Clark, and consent a lot, but I mean, I think that it's a new feminist interpretation, because you're really looking at two people who are approaching each other from a new kind of equal ground that Lois has never been granted before. You have a Superman who is in really obvious ways always thinking about consent and always thinking about the boundaries of others. And I think Atheist Jay on Tumblr pointed out the other night is that Batman vs Superman actually has a juxtaposition of Clark's constant checking for consent, constant navigating of people's boundaries in a respectful way, with Lex Luthor immediately encountering Lois and breaching those boundaries, with everyone around him in a very like physical and threatening way that I think registers to a lot. I think more so to a lot of female audience members, because of the way that, you know, every woman has had their boundaries threatened or trespassed in some way.
Yeah.
And it's
coming back to romance in DCU, I just have this one particular problem with Batman's Nightmare, is that it tries to put that mentality that if Lois Lane dies, then Superman goes nuts immediately.
Yeah.
I don't like that. When, for example, when Lex almost killed Lois, Nightmare Superman, he would pretty much kill this Lex Luthor right away, but he showed he was holding himself back very well. He was like, I'm going to put you down without hurting you, like, even though this is more than you deserve. Like, I don't see Superman becoming a tyrant or a killer or this dark person if Lois Lane dies. Maybe if she dies in some particular way, like an injustice, maybe this might push him to some limits. But I just don't like this mentality that if she dies, then he goes dark.
It's got a very Beauty and the Beast feel to it, where she's responsible for his humanity, she's responsible for taming him, and I don't think that's ever been the case with this relationship. Like, he's always been an unreasonably kind man, and that's always been a really big draw for her. Like, we have to question why Lois is attracted to him, and would she be attracted to a dude who basically she has to provide the humanity for, to the kind of dude who, like, after she died would go on a murderous rampage? Seems unlikely. If he has any respect for her.
Superman. Like, it's credit Superman's character.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the only interpretation of that I could accept, and it would still be with a little bit of, but maybe, you know, if she dies, he's too depressed, he's too distracted, he's not quite there enough to realize that they're being overtaken, and then they get overtaken, and then he gets mind controlled. But it would always have to come down to mind control for me, because I agree, I just don't see him suddenly going, well, she's dead, I'm gonna kill everybody, you know. I just don't see it.
Well, and the good thing about the good thing about the Nightmare situation is that we do have the presence of Darkseid really heavily implied, if not outright stated. So it's not completely out of bounds to imagine that this is mind control.
Yeah. Yep. Besides, there was this at the finale of Superman the Animated Series. There was this pretty much almost the same story that Darkseid got Superman under his control. He brainwashed him into thinking that Superman was raised on Apocalypse. and so he goes and tries to conquer Earth for Darkseid, pretty much how this nightmare implied this to happen. But Lois Lane is the one who snaps him out of this mind control. I kind of expect maybe something like that might happen in Justice League, because otherwise why Lois Lane is the key.
Possibly.
I think there's a lot of possible reasons. I mean, like, you know, we could come up with all sorts of different scenarios, but that is one that I think is definitely implied. As tired as I am of Superman mind control scenarios.
I know. It's not my favorite option, but it's the only one I could take, you know.
Yeah.
It's better than him going genuinely evil, like
of his own accord. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's what, you know, that's what the only thing about it makes it palatable. So I agree. I just, like, I don't know. You see the guy who wanders the world and who is looking for his identity, constantly saving people and endangering his, you know, undercover kind of under the radar status over and over again. You know, the fact that he never once threatened Lois to get her not to reveal his story. You know, he simply told her more about himself and let her make the decision. You know, the fact that Zod shows up and, like, it takes everything in him to try to take him out, and then finally he has to break his neck, and it just wrecks him, you know, like, okay. But suddenly, you know, she's dead, and all of his conscience and his, you know, moral boundaries and everything are just relaxed, and he's completely gone batty. I just don't see it. I just can't see it. It doesn't make sense to me. So
it's so
you know.
frighteningly unhealthy too.
Yes.
To imagine that he's pouring everything about it, like his moral structure, his humanity, his, you know, his hopes and dreams, like everything into this one person. And it's you know, I mean, like, it's not a healthy state for a relationship to be in. I mean, hopefully people have other things. I know that's not a terribly romantic idea, but I think it also, you know, creates the kind of boundaries that I think that adult relationships get built on.
Yep.
Also, I guess we all agree that by the end of Batman v Superman, Clark and Lois are pretty much engaged. In fact,
pretty much.
I just hope that in Justice League they will finally get this happy ending, kind of, because they have been through so much in the previous two movies that I just want to see them finally getting there. Like,
Happy.
Would a wedding be too much to ask? I mean, just throwing it out there. In case you're listening, Mr. Snyder.
it's not too much.
small.
The least should expect.
Yeah, especially like, honestly, like, I don't think marriage is that far out of the realm of possibility, especially with the way Batman v Superman ended. Like, can you imagine Lois' reaction when she finally sees Clark again in Justice League?
Hit me! I don't want it! Give it to me! I'll take it! So, comes the wedding, Dad, come it! So.
His mom.
And
Zach
can you
is so invested in like traditional storylines and those kind of, like, you know, those classic arcs, like one movie ending in a funeral and the next ending in a wedding, wouldn't be terribly off board?
I am shookended.
Shooketh. Me too. Hit me. Bring it on, dude. Bring it on. I can handle it. I can take it.
I'm also
Give it to
excited
me.
to see Clark's reaction. Lois actually wearing the ring.
Oh.
I'll take the laugh.
We're all gonna cry.
All the girls get excited, but seriously,
Right?
I agree that, like, their relationship is beautiful. The way he's depicted it is beautiful. It's gone through its beginning stage. It's gone through its middle stage where it got the darkest. I just can't see him coming back alive and Zach being like, okay, let's manufacture some angst because we got to keep that will they won't they thing going on a little bit longer. It's not even there. So I can't imagine him being like, yeah, sure, now let's dream up something stupid and fairly see-through so that they don't get together right away because that'll drive the audience nuts. No, I really don't see it, especially since this is shaping up to be very much like a trilogy. If we don't get a wedding, we'll get some really, really freaking happy ever after, I hope, because that seems to be what he's gunning for, and I am here for it. So
I mean, on a personal level, if they don't give me a confirmation on this Man of Steel 2 movie, I'm gonna need a pretty freaking happy ending.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah.
We need something.
You know, we've been discussing Lois and Clark for an hour or so by now, but there is also another very beautiful relationship in DCEU, which is Diana and Steve Trevor. Maybe we should talk about this.
Yeah, maybe we should get into that.
Let's talk about another
Let me be the hormonal teenage girl that I am.
I was deeply hoping when the closer we got to it and everything, that I was like, please let Steve just be awesome. Let him be this awesome guy. Let him be this awesome guy. And so many people talked about how, like, oh gosh, going in, I was like, oh, he's going to be some kind of scumbag and then learn his lesson at the end, because that is such a common trend. And so, to have that expectation is not wrong. It just means that that's what we're steeped in nowadays. And
Well,
it was
time plays, though.
refreshing to
Yeah, it's
see,
kind of depressing.
It is, but it was such a wonderful thing just to see Steve as Steve, who's not kind of steeped in the funkiness of today, and who was just a good guy trying to do the right thing, who falls in with a goddess who is also trying to do the right thing, and then they do the right thing together. Like, that just makes me happy all over.
Beautiful.
Well, my favorite thing about Steve is that he's a good guy, but he's not a great guy.
Yeah.
Well, he
Right,
can't
like,
just
Steven
take
said
That's
the
what's wonderful, is that he's
Yeah.
he's not amazing and idealized or anything, and
Yeah.
he's also not a supremely good dude. Like, she's obviously throughout the film slowly understanding that Steve is kind of a below the board scoundrel,
This is true. He's a human.
and
The rest of us.
that's such a great. I mean, it's such a great contrast for those two characters, because she is kind of a mess in the opposite way.
Yeah. I just remember when all the trailers were coming out, and every single time that Steve would say something in the trailer, and it would be the opposite of anything you would expect a male hero to say, and I just stop and start screaming at everyone in the vicinity that this was going to be an amazing movie, just because I thought Steve Trevor was going to be so amazing.
It was really awesome. And I loved how, I don't know how to explain it exactly right, but oh, thank goodness we didn't get the constant, but you're a woman, you can't do that. You're a woman, you can't do that kind of thing. And female director, and of course we're not going to get that, but it was, I think, one of my favorite moments of the entire freaking thing, well, everybody's favorite moment, is, when she goes across no man's land, but specifically when they get to the other side, and they're taking out some of the Germans in the trenches and stuff, but she's more focused on getting to the village, so she turns and says, Steve, let's go. And without question, he falls into step behind her. Then she goes ahead, which is hilarious, kicks everybody's butt in the building and stuff like that, kicks people out of the building and stuff. He's running alongside. She comes into the square and is suddenly under fire, and from behind, I think, where she wasn't quite ready, and he comes in and takes that dude out. And she turns around and is a little bit surprised that he's always there at her back, but he is. And that doesn't mean that he's be quiet, I don't want to talk. And that doesn't mean that suddenly he's in the woman position. That means that he is in the, oh gosh, how do I put it? He's in, I totally lost my train of thought. He's not in the woman position. They haven't reversed their position.
Yeah.
But he is in the I'm always there for you position, which is what both of them should always be, And so it's starting to generate and come out in weird ways because it's war, so they don't get a first date, and they don't get movies, and they don't get to sit around and talk for hours and sit up all night and discover everything about each other and get warm fuzzies and have popcorn, and, they don't get that. And that's okay. We all wish they had that time, but they don't have it. This is war. So instead, they get it in the middle of battle when he's right there at her back taking somebody out, and she says, let's go, and he says, all right. And when they get in the middle of it all, he looks around and goes, wait, no, let's do the shield thing because she could totally do that. And that is just it's just like Lois and Lane because they're working together and they are a partnership, and that's why they move me so much, because that's what these romantic things should be. It shouldn't be about, wow, she's amazingly hot, or, I was such a sexist fool and then I learned differently, or, hey, I need to maintain that mystery and make sure you don't really know my true identity. I don't need any of that. All I really want to see are two people supporting each other and being partners, because that's what life is, guys. Nick, you're engaged. I'm married. I'm not saying that everything's perfect all the time, but you know what? That's what you do when you get in a relationship.
Yep.
You support each other, and you're there for each other. And there is no hierarchy where one is higher than the other. And so to see it depicted on screen moves me greatly, because we are so backwards nowadays in our society that we rarely get that. So when I actually get it, I get really excited. Okay.
And it's just nice to
I
see.
just like how
Relationships are my kink. That's
Sorry,
all.
what?
I just like how,
Oh, right, Gene, I just got that. I agree, though. That is so my kink.
Oh,
All right, go ahead, Archie.
yes,
Sorry.
okay, go ahead.
I just like how, in general, DCEU treats these love interests of main protagonists, that they're just as equally heroes as the main characters.
Yeah.
The same goes for Lois Lane in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, and same goes for Steve Trevor in Wonder Woman. They play a very pivotal part in the development of the main protagonist, and the story itself is pretty much is built around these two characters interacting with each other. Because Steve Trevor is not only a male love interest, he's also a mentor for Diana throughout the entire movie.
Yep.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it's nice to just see in the DCEU seeing healthy relationships that aren't based in like one person pining over the other in an unhealthy way, or like obsessing over the other, and like that it is like a partnership, and like you guys have said, that it's not propping up one person over the other, that they are equal, and then that above all, like, Steve is flawed. He knows that. We as the audience know that. And he's not trying to be perfect. He's just doing the best he can to do something and not nothing, as he said in the movie. But it's just to be able to see that, and I think that's also a reason that, like, I think the film's resonating with so many people, to see like a man who's not trying to like undermine the woman in his life, or to try to be above her, but to be her equal. And I think women, and I think the world in general, not just women alone, like, he has so many qualities like you would want to see in a person in general, not even just a man, that like you almost like want to aspire to be like Steve in that aspect, like where you're not perfect, but you're trying to be
Doing your best.
Yeah, you're doing your best, and you're not always gonna make the best decisions. We're all human beings, and I think that was the great message of the film, is that like you can still try to do the right thing, and you're still good. You're not gonna be perfect all the time, but you're trying. And I love that message, and I love seeing that in Chris Pine's performance. And I personally think that this is one of Chris Pine's best performances that I've seen of his in a long time.
Agreed. Really enjoyed it, and I will say I completely agree. And I think that we need that. We need that on screen nowadays. We need to see that people are human and have flaws and are not perfect, but are still doing their best. And I don't understand again why this can be called dark, because this is the world right now, and this is what we need, is to look at things and go, I'm not perfect, and I'm by far, not going to change the world, but I can do my best, and I can do good things, and we need that. I need that much more than I need to see, muscular people with their shirts off, and chicks in short skirts, and a very, very funny one-liner every other thing. It's great if you have a snarky comment for everything, but ultimately, I love snarky comments and I love sarcasm, but it doesn't fix anything. And so I would like to see more of this portrayal in the world, where there's flawed people doing their best.
I think one of the most challenging things about the and challenging in a good way. I mean, the challenging things about the character development in these films is that we don't have people moving from bad to good or from good to bad, which has for so long been our dichotomy. The way that we recognize character development is this character started out bad and then they ended the movie good. But what we have is we have people moving from like in the case of Suicide Squad, from like bad to medium.
Yep.
Or
Yep.
we have like good to better, good to stronger, good to something less definable and something less easy for the audience to recognize. And I think that has a lot to do with negative critical reception. These aren't, giving you any easy answers to how to grow and change, but they're giving you answers that if you're really looking for answers, they provide. And I think that's why Man of Steel ruined my life and rocked my world and upset my world order, is that you just watch it and you think, oh my God, I've been asking these questions about how I can go from, good to something better, how I can keep evolving as a person when I've already, meet the basic requirements for human decency. How do you go above that? And the Man of Steel really asks, what does that look like? How do you put that into action? And I think that was so powerful for me. That changed everything about my life at the time.
Agreed. That's really nice. Thank you.
About Steve Trevor, there is one line that was said by Steve in Wonder Woman that pretty much describes his character and how this quote, it reflected on Diana in Batman v Superman. He said, "My father said that you can either do nothing or try to do something." And
yes,
you can see Diana go through this in Batman v Superman when she's on the plane watching the news and she's like,
"Yep,
do I go and help them fight Doomsday, or should I forget about this?" And maybe at that particular time she remembered what Steve said: "You can either do nothing or you can do something." And she goes and she does something. And she saves the world, helps save the world.
Yep. Well, and the last part of his line is, "And I already tried doing nothing." And I think that very much resonates her by the time she's watching Doomsday on the news, because she has already tried that.
Yes.
And and now she's at a precipice and she needs to decide, and so she goes one way, and we all cheer when she shows up, and so it's just, I completely agree. It's a beautiful way to depict their relationship and to carry it over into her future now, which is without him, and so it's really, I really, really appreciate that. Okay, question for all you romantic nerds out there. There are those who want Steve to somehow be resurrected and come back because, they love Steve and they want him to be together and everything. And then there are those who are going, that would, somehow ruin it. What does everybody think?
I mean, it'd be nice, but is it possible after how he supposedly died?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't seem possible. But that's just me.
No, I agree. I'm like, how on earth would you get back that guy? How would you get a perfect version of him? I don't see it happening. It would be weird. So, unless Barry yoinked him out. But,
someone did mention Flashpoint, but I was like, maybe.
It would change that beautiful story. All right, go ahead.
If you bring him back for a minute during Flashpoint, that would be very emotionally resonant. But I think that if Flashpoint doesn't return to status quo, then I don't really understand why it's Flashpoint. But that's been my conversation about that for a couple weeks now. So totally different topic.
I had this theory that. Remember that Steve, he was taking a bath on Themyscira, and he said that the water was strange. And I had this theory that maybe it somehow changed his physiology, or maybe it allowed him somehow to survive that explosion, but he falls on the ground and goes into coma, and maybe someone finds him and hides him somewhere, and maybe someday in the present we see him waking up. And something like that might be possible, I think.
That's so hard because that's that. I mean, which Steve are we talking about at that point? At that point, I'm just sort of like, is this Trevor or Rogers?
Yeah, that's very true.
At that point, I'm sort of like, okay, well, I'll give them some of the Steve parallels. They were cute and everything, and the plane thing was probably an homage, but. At the end, how much of this do we get to? I mean, I'm fine with it. I don't care. I love Captain America, but I just wonder like how far can we go before someone starts yelling at us? I guess they're already yelling, so who cares?
Plus, when people are in comas, oh gosh, I just cut you off. Sorry, but they tend to age, so you're still.
Well, there you go.
Like this cute little 9-year-old man, and
Yeah.
it's just not gonna be the same, And so, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Like the biggest, I don't know. As much as my romantic, nerdy heart would love to see those two together, I also recognize that I can't imagine them ever doing it justice if they tried to do it. So I'm kind of like, just leave well alone. Because and always you have the problem of if somebody has a truly beautiful death and they've written it well and they've really kind of made an amazing moment out of it, to then take it back later and be like, oh, never mind, that didn't actually happen. It kind of dishonors the beauty of that choice that they made and of that death scene. So.
And how many resurrections do we get?
Yeah, because then it starts becoming almost like Marvel in that aspect, where like death doesn't feel like it matters as much if you can just revive everyone who everyone wants to come back.
Yes, resurrection should be like jarring and upsetting to the baseline of the universe. Like it should be, the exception rather than the rule.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Otherwise, why do we care?
Because obviously on some of these issues, like it's conflicting because like you want to see these characters again. I'd kill to see Chris Pine as Steve Trevor again, and there could be a way of doing it where maybe not even necessarily Flashpoint, but like they need Steve for whatever reason, and they just have Barry, hey Barry, run back in time, grab Steve Trevor the moment before he dies, and then just pull him into the present day. Like I don't know if they could do something like that, but I'm just saying, like, as a fan, as much as I would want that, like, again, it was to kind of start to downplay the importance of the character's sacrifice.
Yeah.
Like, I look at...
that is always the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I hate to always bring up the MCU compared to DCEU, but, like, in the MCU, like, it's, like, when you first think that a character is dead, it has that emotional weight to it. Like, when you look at like Agent Coulson's death in the Avengers, it was the catalyst for the team finally coming together in the end. And then, as much as I love the character and I've enjoyed from what I've seen of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., that emotional weight is kind of no longer there when you can just bring the character back from the dead like no big deal.
Yeah, yeah.
It lost the meaning.
It does. Wow. It's amazing how it changes it. So I would completely agree with that, and I'm just giggling at the idea of Steve standing in front of some red-suited dude being like, okay, what just happened? But, is this heaven? I completely agree, and that's how I usually tend to come down on it. If you're going to kill a character, you kind of have to make your peace with them being done, and I know in comic world they're like, but they're never really gone, and even in sci-fi it doesn't matter, they're never really gone. But it just, I don't know. You got to be so careful in the way you do things, and I rarely find a resurrection story that makes me happy. And like I haven't watched Doctor Who in a couple seasons, but I do remember a specific one where Clara died, and he like yanked her out right before she did. But then she was angry at him, and she was like, that's not okay. This is my choice, and that was my choice to go out there, and that was my choice to face the Raven, and now you've taken that from me. And that really resonated with me, that, they're making this choice, they're making this sacrifice, and then to suddenly have somebody be like, no, wait, I know better, and to undo it is like, no, you're taking my agency away. You're removing my choice about this. I have decided this is what I'm going to do, and now you are removing that. That's not okay. And I remember being kind of weirded out when the episode then ended with her being perfectly happy to tra-la-la off, not really living, not really dead, because that speech resonated with me so much that was really cool. She was like, no, you will not take that from me. This is mine, and it's my choice.
Moffat knows what's supposed to happen. He always knows what's supposed to happen, but he always cannot handle it. Like he always he's too much of a fanboy. It really is what it is. He's just like, no, I need my cake and I'm gonna eat it too. But he knows what he's supposed to do. He knows what he's supposed to do. He knows what the rules are.
That I thought was really beautiful, and that would honestly be me. I would be ticked if I decided that, if I had made my peace with that, and then somebody else was like, no, never mind. I'd be like, excuse you, Absolutely not. That's not okay. And so, unfortunately, it comes down for writing many characters. When they make that beautiful sacrifice, I just don't want to see writers go in later and be like, okay, never mind, we can fix it. No, it is what it is, and you wrote it that way. They made those choices. They made that sacrifice. You should honor it now. So, except it does really say goodbye to a character.
I'm very cynical about this, but I have to at least bring it up. There is plenty of room, given that Steve is dead now, for canon bisexual Diana Prince, and Steve coming back would probably not leave that window open, which would be sad for me.
And I think from what we know, Patty and Gal are all for having Diana be in a female relationship. And as much as I would love to see the pissed off fanboys being like, Wonder Woman's not gay or bi, like as much as I want to see Steve back, I think again it takes away the emotional weight, but also we don't want Diana to be hinging on like her memory of Steve for the rest of her life. Like, she's allowed to have a life beyond Steve. Again, and Wonder Woman is more than just her romance with Steve Trevor. And as much as we all love him as a character, she has to be able to move on. And to give her a relationship with whoever it is, whether it's a man or a woman, I don't really care either way. But I think you have to give Diana the chance to be her own person outside of being in a relationship with someone, no matter who it is.
Agreed.
There is that line from Steve Trevor, I wish we had more time, and I think it wouldn't be that bad if they got that actual more time in some possible future. And I kind of feel like, sorry maybe for this particular love story, because, Clark is going to come back to Lois. Rick Flag, June Moon survived when they killed Enchantress. But Steve being taken away like forever, it just maybe feels unfair. But who knows?
No, when you look at the comic verse, it is unfair. You're totally right. When you look at war, it's totally unfair, but it's real. So many people were killed in the war and they never came back. They never had the opportunity. And so it's really interesting to me to see. It's a comic book film, but if they're keeping with the reality of war, you don't come back from that. If you die in war, you die. And that's the end of it. And then the people left behind have to figure out how to go on without you for the rest of their lives because you will not be there. And so it's an interesting thing to me, and I agree. It's completely unfair. I would love more time for them. I'd be better off with like some kind of Highlander thing where she's, ageless and he lives and just keeps getting older and older, but they have those years together and then finally he passes away and they've had a big, full, rich life together. I would go for that. I would take that more because then they'd have all that time. But they weren't, and it was rudely cut off, which is what war does. And so it's fascinating to see the two things come together and collide in such a way, because typically when you see war and comic book collide, the comic book kind of takes over. And this one doesn't really feel that way. It was very much a comic book character immersed in World War I.
Yep.
And it was really, really cool. And so part of me hates to see them undo that simply for the fact that the reality, the finality, that's the real part of war, and it's neat to see that portrayed. Although I completely agree, it's freaking unfair. And also, if anybody wanted to accidentally fund or produce some kind of cool spin-off offshoot of Steve before he meets Diana, and it's just him and his buddies doing warlike things, and with Chief and everybody all together, and Sammy doing their thing and pulling weird things and spy maneuvers and stuff, and Etta running around in the middle, I would totally watch that. So just in case anybody else is listening and has lots of money they want to put into something, I would watch that. I would watch the heck right out of that.
Yeah, all me too. With Etta, hire Lucy Davis, and I will.
Oh my gosh, I know. Just honestly, part of me's like, just give me an Edison. I could just take that, But at the same time, if they had all of them together and he kind of showed their beginnings and roots and how they worked together and missions that they pulled off together, I would watch that. So.
Yeah, and again, it goes to show, I think, just how well of a story Patty and Zach told us in Wonder Woman, in that we care about these characters so much, even the smaller characters, and because you've grown attached to these people just within one film, whether it is Sammy or Chief or Etta or whoever. Like you're going to attach to them. We don't want to kind of like abandon them or lose them. But with Wonder Woman, because she's a demigod, she has stories beyond that time. So it sucks because no matter what, I feel like we're more than likely not going to see those characters with her in another film unless they would do a film like that picks up right where the first film left off.
Yeah.
But it's also hard to imagine like where they could take the story that also would include those characters, even if it was like right after, like, 'cause what would happen?
Yes.
That would realistically work for Wonder Woman's story within that time. But also, I think we also want to see Wonder Woman in her own story in the modern day, because most of Wonder Woman takes place in the modern day, and her dealing with Cheetah or whoever, I am curious to see what they do with her character moving forward. And if
I just want to lock Jenkins in a room with Greg Rucka's whole fucking setup. Like every single book he ever wrote. Just sit down with Rucka and emerge transcendent at the end of the week.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel.
Yeah, and especially
That would be fun. I agree, though, Nick. I felt a very great sense of loss when the movie was over, simply because I realized, if they can't possibly just put everybody right back in where they were in that same time period, and they're all humans, save Chief, so I would love to see him again. Please bring him back. But, like, the other ones, they're human. I can't possibly see how, if we move on in the time period, she's going to be able to still hang out with them forever and ever, because they will age, and so even if we get to see them, they'll be an older version of themselves, or they'll be gone, or she'll have moved to a different place and they won't be there. And this makes me sad, because I love every single one of those characters, and so even just getting a little bit of Chief is a trickster demigod, really? Okay, I'll take 1 out of the 5. I will take any of them, so if I get even 1, bring him back, please, because it would be really cool to see some of the original crew from the first movie. But yeah, I agree. And didn't we hear rumors about it being like set in the 80s or something, or was that a weird rumor that has no foundation?
That came from exactly, to be honest. And honestly, I don't know if I would. It sounds
it's probably a weird rumor.
Yeah,
I remember being like the 80s,
I remember
really?
seeing that too. I
There was a rumor that Wonder Woman will be set in Soviet Russia.
Oh, really? Well, we definitely won't get any original crew then.
Yeah, and for me, I don't know, like if it were in the 80s, what they could do with that. Maybe make it like a kind of spy thing, because I know, like, in the past they've kind of made Wonder Woman like have like certain like spy stories that were like in the 60s and 70s, and that would be interesting. But I think for Wonder Woman, I think a lot of us just want to see her on her own story in the modern day, or just picking up where the other one left off. Which again, it's hard to do story wise, because you want to see those characters, but again, it's like I said, like it's hard to find like a realistic story that takes place within that time that would be important enough for them to keep those original characters around.
Yep.
But again, it goes to show how well of a story that they told, because we care so damn much about these characters.
Because they're awesome.
But it would be great story-wise if Wonder Woman 2 will be set in another time period, and we will see Diana forming another bond with another group of people, of good people. It will support this idea that Batman was talking about, that men are still good, and Diana will find another good people in another time period. But maybe when she loses them as well, maybe this what triggers her, this mentality that people made this world where people can't stand together. Because I don't buy that it was only because she kind of lost that war in the meaning of Steve Trevor dying. I think there had to be something more that made her think like that in Batman v Superman.
So that's exactly the problem, is that I think that, and the timeline is terrible. I'm just going to go ahead and put that on the table. The DCEU timeline is terrible. It once you start trying to do the math, it's awful. So if they wanted to mess up more of that, but she put down that 100-year figure. She said 100 years ago. So if you do the math, there's just no wiggle room at that point. But Harley's got a PhD and she's a mob queen at 24. So whatever.
Yeah, and
Oh well.
yeah, but then also those other films come from the films.
The pedant in me is just sitting there like, my timeline.
This is the world of comics. I don't know what we're expecting here. Batman's been Batman since 1940.
This
Yeah.
is true, but our brains still want to make sense and order out of it. That's what we do as humans, and so yeah, we're looking at it going, but it doesn't add up. So I get you there. I remember the whole theory about Batman knocking out Joker's teeth after his Robin was killed, and that's why he's got the medal with the Suicide Squad. And I was like, what a great backstory! Wait, that
I'd love
doesn't add
to
up.
see that.
So yeah.
I mean, clearly there are time pockets in the DCEU, and that's what happened. People just fell into them and emerged as if no time had passed. Otherwise, what are we doing?
You know what? With for lack of anything else, I will take that theory and I'm gonna go. All right, this doesn't bother me anymore. Let's bring it. So now, if you could just time pocket Steve into a small moment of time, I'll take that. So
We solved it.
also Lois, if they would give us a Lois spinoff for Autism Days, and getting to the Pulitzer Prize and such, I would totally take that too.
Yeah, and again, it's just. But also, I mean, I agree that there are time problems with those, with what Wonder Woman said, and then looking at some of the stuff in Suicide Squad. But also, in terms of just Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman, I think they both handled those two movies handled that timeline fairly well in terms of the events of what was going on. There really aren't many continuity errors that I noticed. It wasn't until Suicide Squad and Wonder Woman that you're like, wait a minute, certain things aren't adding up because of what was said in the other movies or whatever.
Yeah,
Well,
it always
that's
gets
the
more
hazard of a
complicated
shared
as they add
universe.
more. Yep.
That's the hazard of a shared universe, and I'd rather
Yes.
have the directors have that oversight and have that creative direction to make those mistakes than not. I'd rather have that than a bunch of Warner Brothers just sitting over their shoulder ominously being like, wait, in 1992, this person was. I don't care at that level. I'd rather have a beautiful piece of art.
Agreed.
Yeah,
I'm also a geek, though.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
It's almost like a double-edged sword in that aspect, where you care, but you also you want to be able to have that creative freedom for the director or whoever's telling the story. And I get that, but it's sometimes it is a little frustrating. That's why certain aspects of Suicide Squad is it's hard to tell where things are lined up. Was Harley captured after the events of Batman vs Superman, or was it before? When did Joker get his teeth knocked out? When did they kill Jason Todd? The movie doesn't answer those questions really at all, so you're left wondering, well, what's going on? What's the timeline of all of this? Even though the bulk of the story of Suicide Squad takes place after Batman vs Superman, of course, because the whole basis of that story is, Superman's death is what caused him to want to create the Suicide Squad. But there are certain questions that you're left wondering, so when, how far after Batman vs Superman is this? When did certain events happen? And when was Deadshot captured? When was Harley captured? And all these things? Because you as fans, we're just curious about the timelines of these things. That's why a lot of us are always nitpicking. Wait a minute. If Wonder Woman says this, then 100 years ago, why didn't she do this? But also, it's just they're movies. They're not perfect.
Can't help it when we care this passionately, we get excited. But you're right, in the end, they are movies. And I agree, I would rather have beautiful art, than I would have the perfect, everything in line, every I dotted, every T crossed universe. It would suck some of the joy and beauty out of it. So I would rather take the art.
And I think what I'm trying to express is that inherent messiness is one of the reasons why, if they wanted to shoehorn a Wonder Woman sequel into some period in that last 100 years, I wouldn't be butthurt. I would just be like, okay,
yep,
let's go.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Go ahead.
Coming back to romance, we know that Justice League will introduce Iris West and of course Mara. What do you guys expect?
Oh my gosh, that queen!
Well,
seeing
as Heather just cameos, I don't expect a lot, but maybe just a scene or something.
Mm-hmm.
I will take what they will give me.
Yeah.
But
I expect a little more from.
I mean,
Mara
given the
than
merchandising, I'm expecting Mara to take a chunk of this movie.
yeah.
Especially because they've already got her Barbie.
It might be just that she looks really cool in her outfit, which she does, but
Mara,
given
Amber
the fact
Heard
that
looks...
she's taking a portion of the merchandise, I would imagine she's got a good chunk.
Yeah, I imagine she like. I think we might have even mentioned this in the chat that she's kind of gonna be like the Wonder Woman of this movie in terms of like her introduction and how they're gonna use that in marketing and merchandising. Because honestly, I look at her Funko Pop and I look at her Barbie. I'm like, oh my god, like her first of all, her design is amazing. I almost want to say it's better than Aquaman's. I mean,
you're looking at it.
True.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Jason Momoa's look as Aquaman, but like, I think Amber Heard just looks great as Mira.
She does.
She looks
She
amazing.
does.
She looks like the Mira in the comics. She just
really
looks
does.
exactly.
She really
She has that advantage too. I mean, like she's basically ripped right off the pages. Like, she looks like the current art. Really, like the current artist, I would say, is probably the closest that gets.
Yeah. Now, quick question, like, so what are you guys expecting from Kiersey Clemons as Iris West? Because I don't know if any of you guys have seen Dope, but I thought she was really good in that movie, and she kind of plays this like unconventional, like lesbian character. Now, I thought she kind of stole the movie for me in that aspect.
All I know is that she's so cute, and excuse me, and Ezra is so cute that like the two of them together might just blow the cuteness off the screen, and I'm totally there for it. So.
Sign me up right now.
Even if it's a little bit, I can picture the chemistry between those two, and I'm like, oh dear, this is gonna be awesome.
I can't wait.
So yeah, I'm like, just give it to me, even just a little bit, even just a little something to give me a taste, and then it can hold me until I get a Flash movie. But I really am excited to see them on screen. I've been a West Allen nerd since the CW Flash, and this is just a perfect continuation of it. I'm like, okay, hit me.
Ezra Barry is so cheeky that I feel like we could definitely have a very, very, very soft, maybe even introverted Iris, or we could go completely the opposite way and they could be bantering nonstop. But either way, like, she's going to be able to, I think, choose that because Ezra Barry is so cheeky and so out of control and so like such a big personality. It could be, a whole movie of him just doggedly pursuing her and being adorable. Or it could be a whole movie of them sparring, and either way, I'd be totally, totally pleased.
Yeah.
I have to say I agree. Although the idea of them sparring together, I'm like, oh, this could be so much fun. So.
So much.
So, like, also, can I just say how happy I am that they kept Iris West's character as an African American character?
Yeah, it was nice.
I'm glad. That was cool.
I have to admit, I didn't know anything. I was a Flash virgin. I knew nothing about the Flash before that show. So she was my first Iris, Candace was, and she's a beautiful Iris. She's wonderful, and I love her, and I love her character. And so, like, that's just, she was my first one, and you always have your first one that you kind of measure everybody else up against. So when Kiersey was announced, I was like, oh my gosh, she's cute, and it just fit perfectly. So I have absolutely no issue. I'm like, yay, they kept her African American. Let's go. And I'm totally.
I mean,
good
Keep
with
Iris Black is so cool. I think because it's such a status quo change. Like, I mean, like, it's really important that they change that character, and that character has a chance of being reflected in the future in the comics.
Yeah.
As a black woman. But also that she's a West, so that means like
The whole
now
family.
Wally's black, and Wally being black is, I mean, that's really big. That would be a huge change. And it would be really, really powerful. It would be powerful, I think, on a Miles Morales level.
Yeah, and the fact that they like cast Kiersey as well as like Candace Patton on the CW Flash, which is like it signals like a complete change in like the actual canon. It's not just a one-off that they just cast an African American woman one time as Iris. Is that they're officially going to change the canon so that like this is the Iris that the public's going to see. We're not going to just go back and forth on this.
Yes, and that's wonderful because it makes Candace's. It avoids that idea that, that's the aberration, that we don't talk about, and that's weird. Now we're going back to normal, quote, quote, No. This is just, okay, and now we're moving on into the future. And I'm really excited. I cannot wait to see her. I think she's going to be wonderful. Candace is always wonderful, so I'm totally good with them keeping it that way. And they've already made Wally Black on the show, which I'm sure everybody knows, but he's adorable. How do you know?
Yeah, and there's a new
Black Wally. So and it gives like new people new possibilities and new roles that that nobody ever would have considered before. Like, I had no idea who Candace was, and now I love her. I had no idea who Kiersey was, and now I'm like, oh, she's so cute. Now, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the kiddo, Keenan.
Keenan Lonsdale.
Who plays Wally on the show. Oh my gosh, he's adorable, and so it's like, keep him black, man. I totally want to see who you would cast as Wally West in the films, Give me somebody new that I don't know so I can love them too. It's really exciting to get new and really cool opportunities, that we haven't had before. So I'm all there for it.
Me too. So I think with that
live action has such a deep effect on the comics in the long run. I mean, like, we have, every era following whatever live action Superman, like the era that follows Reeves, all the Supermen are drawn like Reeves. Ruth had an effect on that too, whether people like to admit it or not. And Superman already looks like Henry Cavill in the comics, like 9 times out of 10. Like, and that's going to have an effect on comic creators as we get new blood in there. That's going to be their Wally West. That's going to be their Iris West, and that's really awesome. Like, there's no getting around that now.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's the new Wally West, right? Like, now there's 2 Wally West floating around, but like there's the new Kid Flash, who is, he is African American, even though I think they kept Iris white.
Didn't they go like some kind of, I don't know? Yeah,
it's some weird
she's
continuity
not
thing.
the same anymore, and she's gone really dark, but not all the way. And so they kind of,
that is one of the things that Rebirth I feel like messed up a lot. Like, and we had some really good diversity movements in the New 52. I think that got rolled back for Rebirth, and it was like, we didn't mean make it whiter. We meant make it like happier.
Yeah.
Like, that's not really what the problem was. Oops.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and that's why, like, again, like, I mean, I love, like, having the original Wally back, but then that takes spotlight away from the younger Wally, who happens to be the African-American one, and now, like, no one's really talking or caring about the other one because they have their quote-unquote original Wally back. So that also is, like, a double-edged sword where, like...
I mean, he's in Teen Titans.
Like,
that's no good.
I just feel bad because, like, it was a character who, like, I was looking forward to read because, hey, it's a different version of Wally than what we had in the past, like, obviously, like, visually and, like, character-wise. And then you kind of take that away because you're like, oh, here's a Wally everyone loved again. Here he is for all of you fans who didn't like the other one. And that's like,
I like the other one.
I mean, I like both. Don't get me wrong, but it's a little unfair. I'll admit.
But right now they both have an ongoing series. The White Wally, he's in Titans, and we have a Black Wally in Teen Titans, and currently he's in Deathstroke series. He's part of his newfound.
Because I mean, more is definitely better. I'm just you just always need to be concerned about the fact that writers automatically prize characters who look like them. And that's just human nature. So I mean, like, when you have majority white male writers, you have majority white, like, those characters get the emphasis and the attention. So forcing him to compete with other Wallies is hard, but like, there's room for both of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's why, like,
it's just I would rather take this approach than what Marvel did in comic books. Because when they introduce a new character and give him the mantle of a well-known superhero, they get rid of the old one. They either make him evil or they kill him entirely. And I just don't like that. I think, as you said, there is always a room for both.
Yeah, and that's just frustrating. That's why, like, it frustrates me when sometimes when, like, fans are like, oh, I hope they do the Rebirth Wally storyline on the Flash, but then, like, at the same time, it's like, there's only one Wally in the universe, so it makes no sense to do that. You're just saying that because you want to see a white Wally.
He is Rebirth Wally. Like, I'm sorry. Like, like, just because an actor has, like, a different face doesn't, like, it's silly. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it's the same thing as, like, people were mad about Grant and Ezra.
And they're still mad about it.
Immediately was sort of like, that's dumb. It's the multiverse. There's millions of me. Like, what are you talking about?
I know.
Like, I'm a geek too, you guys. I know how this works.
Yeah.
I know.
feel so bad for Ezra too, because I think he's gonna do great in the role. From everything we've seen, he looks like he's gonna be an amazing Barry, and that doesn't mean that Grant is any less validated. I mean, personally, I'm a little frustrated with what they did with the show on The Flash, but that doesn't mean that like Grant isn't still a good Barry Allen. I just think that Ezra can be a good Barry Allen also. You can like both. It's not just like a one or the other scenario.
Oh.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, let's give him a chance.
Yeah.
I mean, just because Justice League is going to be released, it doesn't cancel the Flash TV show. It will not stop.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, the two Barrys do cover like extremely different grounds just in terms of the character alone, not going so specifically into like the kind of content that we're going to get from each character, because we haven't really seen what we're getting from Ezra yet. But like, just looking at you know, the kind of character that they're writing, like Grant's Barry is definitely a lot, you know, softer, a lot milder in general than maybe like they're different kind of actors. You know, if you look at Ezra, he's extremely quirky. Like his Barry's already extremely quirky.
Yep.
In like the way that we see him deliver his lines, the way he approaches the other league members, as opposed to like the CW's Barry. And you know, like what Ezra's been saying in interviews about how his Barry is definitely much more of a scientist and much more interested in like manipulating and like discovering his own limits, whereas Barry, like the CW Barry, is more interested in like the whole heroism and I don't know, kind of more emotional aspect of it all. Which I mean, it just shows that like by having two different actors in two different universes, there's just so much more of like the potential of this kind of character that you can explore.
Exactly.
And it's not just limited to just one like perspective. It's just that we get two different areas, completely different areas of the character of the Flash that we can explore just by having two Barry Allens. So I don't understand why you would be upset with that, you know.
Yeah.
You get
Well,
so much.
and we always struggle with that as Superman fans. Like, you know, like that conversation is really familiar because it's like, you know, like there can be like 4 different interpretations of this character and all of those interpretations can be valid. The same goes for Barry. Barry's not like one static thing. He can be a lot of things. And in terms of the difference between Ezra and Grant, it just seems like flavor to me. Like it just seems like, you know, we have two big geeks, and they're just 2 different flavors of geek.
Yeah, and I agree. And it's just my thing is just like you can like multiple interpretations. You don't have to just like one or the other. It's just not even just with the Flash, just with any interpretation. And that's just as a DCEU fan, we have to deal with it on a constant basis. So yeah, that's just really frustrating. But
You know, it's
yeah. So unfortunately, it's actually that time of the day for me to go. I'm like about to run like to work. So I will take the time to say thank you guys for joining me today. It's been a lot of fun, even though we went way over than I anticipated.
All right.
as always.
It was a very interesting subject to discuss.
No, yeah, and I'm glad we had a chance to
it was
discuss it.
really
And I
fun.
want to thank Danielle thank you for joining us. It was really great having you on. You're a really smart and insightful person, and I hope you're willing to join us for the next few podcasts, or as long as you're willing to do it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'd love to come back. Schedule permitting, I'll keep you updated.
Yeah, you guys so just keep us updated and and we never do this on a set day anyway. It kind of just depends on our own availability. So yeah, we'll definitely keep you updated. And thank you guys all again for joining me. It's always fun talking to you guys. You guys are awesome. I'm glad I can call you guys friends and podcast partners, if you will. And for everyone else out there listening, thank you so much for listening. If you guys like what you see here, go ahead and hit subscribe below. You can listen to all the other previous podcasts on my channel and any other content I've posted on the channel, whether it's DCEU related, Marvel related, Star Wars related, whatever. You can probably find it on my channel. Thank you guys so much again. Share this video if you like it. Hit the thumbs up button and all that good stuff. Until next time, guys, have a good one.